For more than 5 months, under the guise of investigating the origins of the novel coronavirus, the Select Subcommittee has scrutinized the drafting and publication of the proximal origin paper. The Select Subcommittee has demanded thousands of pages of internal documents from researchers involved in the paper, conducted transcribed interviews with these researchers, subpoenaed their private communications, and now called 2 of them to testify at today's hearing. We have undertaken all of this work, but to what end? Has targeting these researchers and probing the publication of this paper meaningfully advanced our efforts to prevent and prepare for future pandemics? Or has it been about fishing for evidence to prove their confirmation bias, their theories, with the goal of advancing a predetermined partisan narrative targeting Dr. Fauci, Dr. Collins, and our nation's scientists and public health officials? Dr. Anderson, let me ask my first question to you. In your view, as a leading virologist who studies emerging pathogens, has the Select Subcommittee's examination of your paper done anything to prevent and prepare our nation for the emergence of future novel viruses?
Not to my knowledge, no.
Okay. Dr. Gary, same question to you. Has the Select Subcommittee's examination of the proximal origin paper done anything to prevent and prepare our nation for the emergence of future novel viruses?
Not to this date.
Okay. When I joined the Select Subcommittee as ranking member, I hoped that we could work together on the challenging but critically important mission of identifying forward-looking solutions to prevent and prepare for future pandemics. You know, I'm an emergency medicine physician. I want actionable items to do something that will help relieve pain, suffering, and save lives. I take that doctor's approach in my work in Congress, and I want to do meaningful work that will help save lives, prevent a future pandemic, and prepare for the future pandemic. And this included taking a serious look at whether SARS-CoV-2 emerged from a natural zoonotic transfer or from a research-related incident, so that we could propose substantive policies to prevent the emergence of the next deadly novel airborne virus. But instead of examining this question seriously and objectively, the Select Subcommittee has so far only leveraged it to target our nation's scientists and to vilify our nation's public health officials. And in doing so, the Select Subcommittee has undermined the critical mission of preventing and preparing for future pandemics. As a result of unproven conspiratorial accusations without proof, like those suggesting Dr. Fauci and Dr. Collins covered up the origins of the COVID-19 pandemic, trust in science and our nation's public health institutions has suffered. The Pew Research Center found that fewer than 3 in 10 Americans have a great deal of confidence in scientists to act in the public's interest. So while manufacturing of distrust is largely happening along party lines, it will hurt us all and our public health in the long run, whether you are Republican, Democrat, or Independent. And we are already seeing the consequences. For example, threats against scientists and public health officials have surged in the wake of these accusations, which could have long-term impacts on our ability to cultivate a strong and growing workforce to protect our public health, to work during the next pandemic. Dr. Anderson, you've been the subject of these threats Could you please describe the threats and harassment you've experienced since the publication of the Proximal Origin paper?
I'll say the paper itself has not resulted in threats. However, the misinformation, disinformation, and conspiracy theories around the paper have resulted in significant harassment and threats, including everything from typical targets on social media, to emails, to telephone calls, to my office, to my own phone, to death threats.
Can you give
all
an
of which have been
example of
happening.
one of those death threats to you and yours?
Of course. One example, for example, will be online where there are so-called kill lists. And I have found myself on those lists together with my co-authors, together with many other colleagues involved in anything from origin research to vaccine research. For example, Peter Hotez has been a frequent target of many of these same
And do they
threats.
say why they want to harm you?
I think the conspiracy theory here, which is amplified by the sub-select committee's majority here, is that basically that the virus was created and that American scientists played a role in that and have been covering that up. And the suggestions that there have been quid pro quos in turn of covering this up, all of which, as the record clearly shows, is false. And these in themselves result in these.
And so that
threats.
these manufactured conspiratorial accusations without that proof instills these emotions from the public that listens to them and results in an aggressive, threatening environment for you and other scientists?
Correct, and I think understandably so, because we have all lived through a devastating pandemic with a lot of personal consequences to a lot of different people, and we're all suffering and hurting. And I think the focus has been on there is a need to blame somebody for this. There's a need to deflect from our own personal suffering, and this has been part of that.
And so how does this kind of harassment undermine the ability of scientists to do critical work that helps to promote our understanding of emerging public health threats?
I think it sets a terrible example for future scientists looking at the attacks directed against us, for example. And if I was a future scientist and looking at that and saying, like, maybe I'm not going to go into infectious disease research. If I'm an emergency care physician or a nurse saying maybe infectious diseases is not for me because I've seen all the different harassments going on here. So from that perspective is damaging. It's also incredibly damaging to our own work. We do study the origins of pandemics, including this one, but myself and Dr. Gary next to me, we study a lot of different viruses, together with colleagues in Africa, for example, and these viruses continue to pose threats, and of course, that work is less active than it would have been.
So confirmation bias is when you already are convinced 100% of a certain outcome, and your worldview will now be seen through a lens of that belief. And so regardless of the facts and the evidence presented to you, you will formulate that based on what your already preconceived notion is, and you will work to prove what you already believe exists. How does that harm our public health researchers in this investigation when people are continuing to push a narrative that involves intimidating public health scientists by bringing them here, yelling at them, accusing them if they're not aligned with their confirmation bias, with their preconceived notion?
I think it's deeply unhelpful.
As a physician and public health expert, I am deeply troubled that the Select Subcommittee has prioritized its time and resources on advancing an extreme partisan narrative over fulfilling our obligation to the American people to mitigate future public health threats. And so I urge my colleagues on the other side of the aisle to cease their misguided efforts that endanger science and public health, and I yield back.